Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 1986 erotic drama titled 9.5 Weeks. Now, 9.5 Weeks runs for 1 hour and 57 minutes long. It is directed by Adrian Lyne. It is produced by Mark Damon, Sidney Kimmel, Zamal King, and Anthony Rufus Isaacs. The script was written by Sarah Kernochin, Zalman King, and Patricia Luiana Knopp. And it is actually based on a play by Ingeborg Day. The score was done by Jack Nitzsche, the cinematography by Peter Bizio, and the editing was done by Caroline Biggerstaff, Ed Hansen, Tom Rolfe, and Mark Winitsky. And the stars of the movie are Mickey Rourke, Kim Basinger, Margaret Whitten, David Margulies, Christine Baranski, Karen Young, and Roderick Cook. Now, this is a pretty unusual movie especially for the likes of me. Now, when you think of the term erotic drama, you'll probably think of a lot of, extreme nudity, extreme sexuality, and just something for guys and girls who are somewhat curious in the world of eroticism. But I want to tell you something right now. It's not as bad as one might think. It's it's not that raunchy, to be honest with you. There's not a lot of excessive nudity, but there is a lot of sexual innuendos. But a lot of it is actually, believe it or not, domestic. So it's not hardcore porn. It's actually pretty softcore to think about it. It's got more dramatic elements with sexual um sexual curiosities as opposed to either softcore porn or hardcore. It's not really actually over excessively pornographic. It's more has more of a journey type of movie as opposed to just two people constantly going on a sexual journey. It's a little bit more to that. There's a lot of dramatization in this movie. There's a lot of interesting things about this movie, too. Being the fact that it was made in 1986, you get that quite feeling of the 80s in there. You know, I was a child in the 80s. I was 10 years old when this movie came out. And I kind of looked like I was going back into the 80s when I was just a 10-year-old little boy. Although I'm sure that when I was 10 years old, I was told to stay away from this movie. And if parents are going to expose their children to see a movie of this magnitude, you guys are crazy. But I digress. This movie is not as bad as it sounds if for people who are uh, squeamish towards sexual innuendos. I mean, most of the time, Mickey Rourke and Kim Basinger are fully clothed, but they do go on a sexual journey. But like I said, it's domestic compared to anything that Ron Jeremy has directed, okay, or that any kind of it's not a porno film. It's just erotic drama, kind of almost like Eyes Wide Shut. Eyes Wide Shut was an erotic drama. and yet you don't see too much hardcore nudity. It's more of a storytelling. It's not a one dimensional story of everybody taking their clothes off and engaging in intercourse. It's nothing like that at all. Besides that, it's only just basically a two character movie, and everybody is just, in the background. There's only really two characters in this movie: Mickey Rourke as a Wall Street a Wall Street tycoon named John Gray, and Kim Basinger. She's an art gallery employee named Elizabeth McGraw, and it's set in New York City, and they seem to be somewhat living the life. They're both well employed. They live in nice, exquisite penthouse apartments in New York City, and we know that living in that kind of environment is not cheap. So they must be very well employed. They're very good at their jobs. They seem to make a nice, handsome profit. And when I'm just pretty glad that that this movie actually worked because of the eye candy for both male and female alike. I mean, the women will drool over Mickey Rourke because back in the 1980s, Mickey Rourke was a stud. And Kim Basinger, she even back in 1986, she was a hottie. She's still a hottie today. I mean, it's hard to believe. She's 63 years old and she still looks really good for her age. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about Mickey Rourke. I mean, he kind of let himself go over the years. Plastic surgery, experimenting with drugs, probably being punched in the face one too many times when, he quit acting to pursue his career as a boxer, and that kind of did him in. And, it took him a long time to make a comeback. Fortunately, he did make a comeback in 2008 with the movie The Wrestler, but he's still a shell of his former self. I mean, back in the 80s, who wouldn't want to sleep with Mickey Rourke? Who wouldn't want to get into bed with Kim Basinger? Besides Alec Baldwin. This movie was actually pretty good. I mean, it had a smooth flowing plot. It had attractive performers, and I would say the direction was very good. I mean, you get a good look, a good glance at 80s New York City in all its believability. I mean, back in the 80s, it was a very bustling city, back and forth, back and forth. Sure, it hasn't really aged that well because of the fact that it is a permanent stuck in the 80s film. But I like to sometimes just go back to the 80s just to see what it was like, just to see what life was like. Of course, it's a lot different than today with our modern technology, and very few people seem to be going outside now and then. But back in the 80s, traffic in New York City was bustling, people going back and forth. It really truly was the city that never sleeps. Still isn't, but this really truly personifies what New York City was like in the 80s. It was kind of a dirty city. There were gangs, there was crime. I mean, there were stores and restaurants galore. Everything was like right there, all in front of you. Still is, but the 80s really, really gets you into that feel. And I think that director Adrian Lyne did a good job at bringing that to life. So, 9.5 Weeks is based on an erotic drama that stars Kim Basinger as art gallery owner Elizabeth McGraw and Mickey Rourke as Wall Street tycoon John Gray, and they embark on a steamy and seductive romantic escapade that breaks the barriers of how far she will go and about how far he will go. In sync to the title, the relationship is not long lasting. They actually go on for 9.5 weeks. Now, what happens during this romantic journey? Well, John, of course, with his oozing charisma and his handsome charms, is just too much for Elizabeth to go to. She knows that this guy is kind of a creepy person, but he's not creepy as in like scary. His level of creepy macabre comes more towards his sexual fantasies. And the sexual fantasies that he has towards Elizabeth is what is the cornerstone of this movie. Now, of course, these guys go on a sexual journey that lasts 9.5 weeks. They're not actually a couple. No, they're just two participants in a sexual fantasy journey that makes them do some unusual things sexually. Whether it be. I'll get to the whole thing in a bit. Of course, as like I said, as apropos to the title, this sexual journey lasts 9.5 weeks, but the experience was truly an unforgettable experience, and it's probably going to be something that neither John or Elizabeth will ever forget. And it's very fulfilling. John has been smitten with Elizabeth the moment he has set eyes on her, while his flawless charisma is totally hard for Elizabeth to resist. While many of her friends would probably just tell her to stay away from this guy, she just can't help it. His handsome charm, his charisma, his smile is just so seductive. She just can't get away from this guy as much as she probably may want to. I mean, and he's not the only person he's ever done this kind of sexual fantasy to. I mean, one day while he was out and she was staying at his place for a little bit, she got a little antsy as to when he'll come back. And while she was waiting, she looked through his private stuff, and it appears as if he's done that. He's seductive women many times before. But then again, who can blame them? I mean, this guy is a stud muffin, and everybody would like to want to come to him. And I'm not saying the stud muffin thing as like I'm gay or anything like that. I'm not. I'm a heterosexual. But, like what I'm saying is that the guy just has this natural charismatic charm, and there's nothing wrong with being gay, but he just has this natural charm, this flair of charisma that any woman would want to go to him. Elizabeth is not the only one, as you could tell from her looking into his private things. Of course, like in almost every movie that deals with thrillers, suspense, and stuff like that, we know that there's something not going right when, the lead character is out of town, and then the second lead looks into his or her private stuff, and we realize that something does not add up. And in this movie, of course, personifies that to a max. As a no brainer, she actually falls in love with John. And while his behavior becomes more domineering and controlling, his seductive mannerisms are just so unbearable for her to just let go. He continually pampers her with gifts, even though that barely phases her romantically. It appears that what gets her juices flowing is his manipulative charm and his physical good looks. The most intimate moments came from a scene where Elizabeth is blindfolded in the kitchen and John starts rubbing her with ice cubes and feeds her all kinds of different foods while her eyes are blocked. And there's also many moments where they have sex in places we would have never imagined, like a back alley where she eventually also gets into some of his duds and dresses like a man to go to some kind of a man's club where they get involved there romantically. They make sex in every place. There's a clock tower. They go to an amusement park where they have sex. There were some of the more memorable scenes too. Was when they were at a furniture store and they were making sex on the bed while the clerk is looking on, trying to stay professional, while at the same time she's like, "What the hell are they doing?" There's also some memorable scenes where, like, when they were at the back alley and making love, and all of a sudden a group of thugs, going out, calling them calling them names like they're a bunch of faggots, and then it leads these thugs into the middle of a chase between John and Elizabeth, where John eventually beats the shit out of them. Memorable. There are a lot of great memorable scenes in this movie that is totally unforgettable, and it's enjoyable to watch. It may not necessarily be for everybody, and of course, it's obviously going to be R rated. It's something that you will only most likely see late at night. And the reason why, of course, it's rated R, well, obviously, because it's got strong, heavy sexual content in this. But there's never a dull moment. It's not just a one dimensional, every 2 minutes they get into bed. No, they have sex in all kinds of different places. They have many different kind of ritualistic sexual fantasies and sexual practices that it's actually pretty innovative and creative, if you know what I mean. Sure, the eroticism is quite frequent. The scenes may at times be overly done in terms of vulgarity, as one might anticipate, but it all comes down on its audience to draw their own interpretations. And one of the things I actually liked about this movie, aside from the nostalgic factors and the interesting, innovative scenes, is because it's actually quite unpredictable. John is a very unpredictable guy who will come up with many different innovative and original ways to lure Elizabeth into his little sexual web. Is there any violence in this movie except for, them beating the crap out of a couple of homophobic thugs? It's not really that bad. Uh we anxiously await to see if his raw emotions change as this movie tries to keep you at the edge of your seat. But throughout the movie, John succeeds to keep his calmness intact even when he's at his most controlling scenes, which makes this man a hostile individual with a subtle demeanor. In the case of Elizabeth, her vulnerable desire is just to be loved, no matter how much of a jerk John can be. And John is a jerk. I mean, of course, he's the typical a male domineering sex guy, and she's the vulnerable sex kitten. But you just can't help but to be impressed by the dynamic chemistry between John and Elizabeth. Sure, it's not gonna win any awards or anything like that, and maybe I might be overly praising it, but it's still not a bad film to watch. If you're into 80s stuff, if you love the soundtrack by John Nitschke, hey, it's been almost 2.5 decades since I last heard Corey Hart's Eurasian Eyes. I haven't heard that song in a long, long time. And at one time when I was a little boy, I was a huge fan of the Canadian born singer Corey Hart. I haven't heard Euro-Asian Eyes in a long, long time. There's a lot of great 80s songs that was selected by Nitschke. It's just purely amazing. You get to hear all this great nostalgic 80s songs with the guitars and the drum machines, which was synonymous with the 80s, where the saxophone was the most abused instrument in the music scenes, where mechanical voices were very pivotal, and the amazing guitar riffs of 80s sounds really gets you going. Like, it brought a tear to my eye. It was like a era that I kind of missed the most, the era of my innocence. Even though this movie hardly is anything but innocent, but the music, oh, I gotta hear your Asian Eyes again. It's just dynamic. They don't have singers like this anymore like they used to. Corey Hart is an amazing musician. And sure, she didn't like the games he played, she still went along and enjoyed what was given to her. And so, as the smoke clears, Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke's characters are so engaging, you will want to applaud them when their names appear when the final credits roll. And it was such a great idea that director Adrian Lyne did when, I don't know whether it was a he or she, I don't remember. Anyhow, when this person selected Mickey Rourke and Kim Basinger, because let's face it, at the time, Mickey Rourke was the real deal. And Kim Basinger, she was just as attractive back then, and she still looks really good for her age. I can't bear to see them again in another 9.5 weeks movie. And it's not because, they're both, older people. Mickey Rourke now is 64 years old, and Kim Basinger is 63. But if they ever did a remake, I could see Kim Basinger in it, although I would see her probably dumped as a supporting character as opposed to the lead that she was in the 80s. But if she does make a cameo in a 9.5 weeks remake or something like that, I would definitely like to welcome her with open arms. I can't see Mickey Rourke do it. If they ever decide to do a remake of it, I hardly doubt that they will. Um, if I'm not mistaken, they actually did launch a direct to video sequel called Another 9.5 Weeks. And I don't know if Mickey Rourke or Kim Basinger reprised their roles. I do believe in the late 90s they did not a remake, but a prequel to it. I don't remember the title, but I do know it launched a few other follow-up movies to this one. But 9.5 weeks, for what it was a good, solid, erotic drama, purely enjoyable. Definitely not something you don't want to bring your kids to see. It's rated R. Don't bring your kids to see this one. It's not for kids at all. Wait till they're about 18 or over. Leave it to the adults to watch. You bring your kids to see this movie, you're all fucked in the head. So don't do it. Just leave it to the adults. Okay? They'll have their time to see it when they want to. But for now, this is strictly an adult film. And if I was to give this movie a score out of 10, I would definitely give 9.5 weeks. It's not the best movie in the world, but it's still, a good drama. I think I would give this movie a 7.5 out of 10. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. Just remember, be kind, be courteous, and don't be rude. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Ryder saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.